Greetings, family, and welcome to another edition of Black Talk Radio, where black media matters and black life definitely matters. Today is Monday, May 28th, 2018. Well, family, tomorrow, Tuesday, May 29th, Starbucks will be doing a training, and it's an implicit bias and anti-discrimination training that they're going to be going through for 8,000 different Starbucks locations. The reason why is because, as you know by now, the two black men pictured here were involved in a discrimination at a Starbucks in Philadelphia, where they were waiting for a friend and the police were called by the manager. Come to find out, they were waiting for a friend to talk about real estate and do some positive things in the community. But nonetheless, they were called on by a suspected racist manager, and other events took place afterwards. And now, because of that situation, 8,000 of the Starbucks locations are closed tomorrow due to an implicit bias training that they're going to go through. Now, before I get into this video, I want to make 2 points. A is why USA Today, who did this segment, had these two black men sit so close together on this couch like this. They got them almost hugged up. I was kind of puzzled by that because I'm like, what is the image that they're trying to show with these two brothers here? Anyways, the second point is, why are we talking about this? We're talking about this in 2018 because black people are still facing discrimination and racist situations. So this is the result of bad and backwards behavior of white Americans. Let me repeat. The reason why Starbucks is going through this situation, and the reason why we even have to discuss it, is because of the foul and backwards behavior that white people exhibit towards black people. It says a lot about the type of people we're dealing with. It says a lot about their character. And so with that, now 8,000 of Starbucks stores have to go through a training just behind the bad, foul actions of a racist employee that they just simply should have fired and gotten rid of. But because they've been having so many different types of discriminatory situations, they had to overall do something like an overhaul. They had to really make themselves look good in the media because, after all, a lot of people were going to Starbucks. But anyways, instead of focusing on this story itself, because you know now, tomorrow, 8,000 stores, they're going to be going through the training. Instead, I'd like to focus on the author who helped and guided and given Starbucks some support on their implicit bias training. And the author, her name is Robin Diangelo, who writes the book called White Fragility: Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. So without further ado, let's look into that. So here is a copy of what the book looks like. White Fragility: Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin Diangelo. And the foreword is by Michael Eric Dyson. Now, USA, who did this piece, they did a few questions for Robin Diangelo to where she gave her viewpoints. And that's what I plan on sharing with you here and now. And so, without further ado, addressing racism makes many white people feel anger, fear, and guilt, which leads to denial, minimization, deflections, and defensiveness, Diangelo says, even though racism inevitably touches everyone. No one can escape the messages of white superiority, she said, adding that the reflex to shut down conversations about racism helps keep it alive. So the fact that we deny these conversations and we don't have these conversations is why racism is kept alive. But we already knew this. Let's continue. Robin Diangelo goes further into saying that white people are bad at admitting implicit bias and therefore good at denying the realities of racism, says Robin Diangelo, who conducts workshops on race, including implicit bias, and recently provided Starbucks with feedback on training support and follow-up. She says, "I don't believe it's humanly possible to be free of bias," Diangelo said, "but she does believe we can work on it." So, 8 in 10 blacks say racism is a big problem in American society, and about half of whites say the same, according to the Pew Research Center. However, 55% of whites believe whites are discriminated against in America today, according to a poll from Harvard, NPR, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. In other words, there are 55% of white people. Now, understand that number. It is a huge number when you think about it. When you think about their overall number, you know how they like to do statistics and whatnot, but you think about that 55%, and that's a huge number of whites who feel that they are the ones who are being discriminated against. Never mind the fact that they hold all the power and control in this white supremacist system, since that's what we call it. But nonetheless, they feel, 55% of them anyway, feel that they're the ones who get discriminated against. So, anyways, as you can see from this first question here that USA Today poses to Robin Diangelo, they say, "You say the mainstream definition of racism is problematic. Why?" Well, the mainstream definition of a racist is always an individual who consciously does not like people based on race and intentionally seeks to hurt them. Now, as long as that is our definition of a racist, virtually every white person is exempt from the system we are in. So that's why the definition is problematic. So let's go further. She continues by saying, "I think that reductive definition is the root of virtually all white defensiveness on this topic, because if I think that's what a racist is, and you suggest that anything I've said or done is racist, you've just put me in the category of immoral person, and now I'm going to have to defend my moral character." So basically she's saying that we are basically pushing white people into a corner by attacking them, and basically we're attacking them with the truth, and it puts them on the defense. But let's continue. USA continues and asks the question, "Is everyone racist?" She says, "While everyone has racial bias, I reserve the word racist to describe the bias that white people have, which is our collective bias is backed by institutional power." That's right. It is described as bias that white people have that is backed by institutional power. So white privilege has become a commonly used term, but what about white people who've suffered hardships? She says, "It's not that white people don't face barriers. What I'm saying is, you have not faced this one, racism. And not facing this one has helped you navigate your other ones. This was a struggle with my students who said, well, I'm queer, I'm Jewish, I have a disability, I'm not privileged." I think they need to hear it from somebody who shared their identity. I have moved people forward who were raised poor or working class and could not own racial privilege by sharing how I came to understand mine. I did it by sharing my own experience as someone who grew up in poverty. While I have struggled with a deep sense of class, shame, and the message that I was less than, I still always knew that I was white, and that made me better than poor people of color and black people. In fact, being white has helped me escape poverty. No one looks at me and assumes I don't belong in academia, but my colleagues who are black can't say the same. The question that white people need to ask ourselves is not if we were shaped by the forces of racism, but how. Very good point. The next point that the USA Today asks is, you say white progressives cause the most daily damage to black people. Why? She answers, white progressives create the daily climate that black people must function within. We are the co-workers and friends who black people so often cannot share their perspectives and experience with, or talk to us about our problematic racial assumptions and patterns, because we are so confident that we don't have any problematic racial assumptions and patterns. We are the ones most likely to be in black people's lives in some way, and yet most white progressives, despite our confidence that we are free of racism, do not understand how race shapes our own lives. That obliviousness and ignorance is not benign or incorrect, and when occupied with complacency, certitude, and arrogance, and the whole "I already know all this" attitude, creates a rather miserable daily experience for black people. So it sounds like this author has a lot of empathy. Empathy that most white people don't have. That's what I gather from this article and from this author right off the top. But I digress. The next question they ask is simple. How does a white person being defensive affect a black person? I often ask a black person in my workshops the simple question, how often have you tried to give white people feedback on our inevitable and often unaware racism, and have that go well for you? She says they laugh, they roll their eyes. Never or rarely. We're so difficult about this. And that, of course, functions beautifully to kind of police people of color or black people into not giving us feedback, because they risk even more punishment with our defensiveness, our hurt feelings, our minimization, our explaining or white-splaining away. It's like this loop that keeps everyone in their place. But of course, ultimately, who does that benefit? Trust me, black people bring home way more racism every day, every single day, than they bother talking to us about. And that's true. And so, family, just know that I'm going to leave a link to this article in the description, but I'm not going to read all of this, so I'm going to go to the end, because their last question is this. After the civil rights movement, you say people began to equate racism with bad people. How does that play out now, is the question. She answers by saying, the default of our society is the reproduction of racial inequality. I mean, that's what it does. That's what it's been doing for hundreds of years. By every measure, black people and people of color and indigenous people in particular are at the bottom. And all this system really requires to keep on keeping on is for white people to just be really nice. You know? Just be really nice. Smile at your coworkers who are black. Go to lunch on occasion and do nothing else. And I'm not saying don't be nice, but niceness is not courageous. It's not strategic. It will not get racism on the table to address it, and it won't keep it on the table when everyone wants it off. And so lastly, where do we go from here? She replies by saying, nobody really knows what it would look like to have a society free of domination and bias. I think the goal is to try to identify your biases, try to uproot them, challenge them, get new information, build relationships with people you've been socialized to see as not valuable to be in a relationship with. These are not small tasks, and our efforts need to be lifelong and ongoing. In other words, she's saying that they need to be authentic and not fake and phony. We've got a long road to travel as Americans, but Black Native Americans, we deserve and we demand the respect that we have earned. We demand the respect that we have earned. Yes, Black people, we have built this country. We earned the respect that we should be given. This is Guru at Black Talk Radio. Thanks a lot for watching. Peace and love to you, and we'll see you in the next video. On this point though, white fragility, why it's so difficult for white people to talk about racism is simply they don't want to deal or face the truth. The truth is very hard to deal with, at least for some. So with that, we're going to close out. Thanks again. We'll see you in the next video. Peace out.